I've brought you here to St Paul's Cathedral, named as one of the most romantic spots in London, to tell you the story of when Lord Byron got dumped and ended up writing When We Two Parted. The Lord Byron that exists in reputation as being this giant of 18th and 19th century literature was not the man who wrote this poem. The man who wrote this poem was 25. He'd had some success, but he hadn't quite reached the peak of his celebrity fame. He was a deeply insecure man. He had a foot that wasn't quite physically mobile, that he was incredibly self-conscious about as a result of birth defect. He also believed that he was ugly. He suffered from anorexia, we'd say now, and very, very much controlled what he ate because he had a fear of being unattractive, even though most sources and portraits say that he was quite handsome. He also had a very big secret. His secret was that, well, we'd say now that he was bisexual. He'd enjoyed relationships and flings and physical encounters with both men and women. In fact, what his biographers would say was his best friend at university, but in reality was probably his boyfriend, gave him a ring with a red stone. And he wore that every day till the day he died. In fact, it had to be cut off the fingers of his dead body when he passed away. These relationships, while now would not really be much of a problem, were a really big issue for Byron. He was a peer. He was born into nobility. And for a secret like this to come out in a time where you could be imprisoned or transported for being homosexual, that secret could ruin him both financially and socially. That secret was to come out a few years after this poem was written, when he was divorced from his wife and she revealed everything that he'd told her. But for now, let's focus on the insecure Byron, hiding who he really is. Byron also saw himself as a man apart. We say it now when we say someone is a Byronic figure, the lone, romantic man on his own, observing society, feeling his deep feelings. A lot of that was Byron's PR, to be honest. He always pictured himself and wrote himself as this person apart, this outsider from society. And as I mentioned before, his secret about his sexuality may well be the cause of this, because it did set him apart. He had something he could never share. A really good example of this is in the famous painting made of the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley's death. In it, Shelley and his friends are gathered on one side around the body, but Byron is alone on the left, incredibly well dressed, always being the Byronic figure. This could kind of be what comes up in the poem. Everyone else is staring at him, everyone else is gossiping about him. But actually, he wouldn't have really been in that situation. In fact, he would have been surrounded by people, but that's how he chose to represent himself. Byron had had some romantic near misses before the affair in question. His most famous being Lady Caroline Lamb, a romantic, spontaneous fling, had turned into a bit of a stalker situation. She would follow him to his apartment. She told people they'd be married without telling Byron first. And it's this whole saga. in which we get the famous phrase mad, bad and dangerous to know, because she completely blamed Byron for making her act that way. Byron wasn't a good guy, I'm not necessarily defending him, but it wasn't one-sided. And once he'd finished this affair and he felt he was done with the ultimate crazy ex, he was ready to love again. Byron was perpetually falling in love. He was always ready to love again. But this time, he felt like he had found the one. The woman Byron decided was the love of his life was Lady Frances Wedderburn. She was beautiful, tall, slim, intelligent, and ever so slightly married to one of his best friends. And Byron was the godfather to their children. All in all, it was a very awkward situation. Their eyes met across a crowded room at a party. She decided, well, we're not quite sure who decided first actually. We'll go with her because I like to think of Lady Frances as having control in this situation. She decided to send him a love note at the party in the room where her husband was. He received it and sent her one back, the Georgian equivalent of sexting. Notes flurried between them. It became an emotional affair with letters flying across the country. Byron decided that she should not be married to her husband anymore. She should be married to him, and he convinced her that what she wanted to do was leave her husband. The affair all came to a head when Byron decided to invite Lady Frances and her husband away for a romantic weekend to his country estate at Newstead in Nottingham. It all came to a head at this weekend in Newstead. Byron invited Lady Frances to a deserted ruin called the Monk's Chapel. It may or may not have been a real chapel. And he said, "It's time to leave your husband and be with me." And they kissed, finally. But she backed off and she said, "No, I'm going to stay with my husband, stay with my family. Thank you, Byron. No, thank you." Byron was absolutely devastated. He knew she was the one. They decided to spend time apart. She went away for a little bit, and Byron moved on, started to heal. The problem was, after a few months, she came back into his social circle, and that was when Byron had to let his anger out. The question you might be asking yourself is, how do I know all this? If it was a private affair, and indeed private business, why have I been able to find out all this? The answer is, Byron wrote an extra verse to the poem, naming names and saying explicitly who it was about and why he was so angry. This verse was cut out by his editors because it was felt to be a little bit trashy to be saying exactly who had done something wrong and the fact it was still someone who was married. The extra verse reveals it all.
Then fare thee well, Fanny, now doubly undone, to prove false unto many as faithless to one. Thou art past all recalling, even would I recall. For the woman once falling, forever must fall.
Was Byron really devastated? Did he really spend the rest of his life in silence and tears? Well, no, he didn't. A short time after writing the poem, he got married, and that ended, frankly, terribly. He was accused of intimate partner violence, and his wife left him. They'd scandalously divorced, and in the papers it was revealed all the terrible things he had done to her. She also let slip that he was bisexual, and his social reputation was absolutely ruined.
The statue in front of me was created by the Greek government as a thank you to Byron for the service that he provided during the Greek War of Independence. You see, after living a rootless, kind of libertine existence throughout Europe, he finally found the cause that he believed in, and that was Greek independence. Using his resources, Byron raised an army to try and help the country that he'd grown to love, but he was woefully underprepared and ended up dying of a fever before he could see any action. This statue seems like a fitting end to our story. Byron is now accepted by the establishment as being one of England's greatest poets, something he never saw in his life. And this acceptance, this remembering, this collective memory of who he was outside of scandal is what's presented to us today. He would never get that acceptance in his lifetime, so this statue shows what he has now become away from the spotlight.